Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning in this episode, and I'm excited to introduce you to Casey Sigmon. Casey is, Casey, thank you for being here. She's a preaching professor at St. Paul's Seminary here in Kansas City, Missouri, which I think we're both. I'm in Missouri. Are you in Missouri? Or are you in?
I'm in Missouri.
You're in Missouri. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you for doing this. We've kind of we're both. I'm a disciple of Christ pastor now for the last 2 years, and Casey hangs out with disciples, and then also a few Methodists, I'm sure, at St. Paul's, and a few others, UCC. But and then she's also man, I learned so much. We did some bonus questions for our supporters. And I learned that she's a comedian, and she likes karaoke and all kinds of fun stuff there. So thanks, Casey, for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Fred. I'm excited for the adventure.
Yeah. We also met or crossed paths with there was a conference we did on the uncontrolling love of God, which is a process theology collective edited book that came out that dealt with all kinds of topics for how to do process theology in the church world, and worship and preaching and all the different ways. So we're going to get into that. But first, let's start with a little of your backstory, where you're from, where you grew up, what was your family of origin like? Give us a little feel for your spiritual journey, where it started, and how you end up being a preaching professor of all things.
I know, of all things.
Of all things.
Yeah, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to be a preaching professor when you know where I come from. But I'm from Kansas City. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, but was raised for the most part on the other side of the state line in those Johnson County suburbs. I'm the child of a extremely extroverted salesman and an extremely introverted artist who worked at Hallmark, who share passion for music and comedy. So did not grow up in a religious household. We were quote unquote Catholic a few times a year. But for the most part, there was, no going to church on Sundays, not really conversations about the spiritual religious life, but a lot of laughter, a lot of music, a lot of outdoor time and movement. So my high school rebellion was, as the oldest child, to get involved in evangelical parachurch world.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I totally shocked my parents, because they were definitely people who were like, oh yeah, like it's natural to like party and do this and that. And I'm like, I'm going to Young Life, and I want to go to summer camp, and I gave my life to Jesus. And they were like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Wow. Interesting. Are they old enough to be kind of like hippies? Like, are they older than me, or
So
like I'm 64, so
they're older than you. And so I would say like my mom lived in Haight-Ashbury in the 70s.
Wow.
And my dad I mean, it's like a Midwestern hippie. I mean, he went to shows, he rode a motorcycle, uh yeah, other hippie-like
Ah,
things. So yeah,
huh.
I will just say
All right. Cool.
that's the household I grew up in.
I had one
Yeah.
hippie friend who said, I decided not to change so that when my kids rebelled, they'd be normal. It was, it's like one of my long-haired hippie friends who was, you know, never let go of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh
So you
man.
became an evangelical.
I became an evangelical.
Dang.
I know. Uh, isn't that, it's so funny, right? Like to see how our households shape us. But I mean, in
Hmm.
all honesty, I was so well like loved and cared for by the women in that world who
Mm.
were my mentors. And so I didn't really like know all the gendered limits in the stained glass ceiling of evangelicalism right away because my mentors were women and they
Mm.
were strong and they were funny and they were smart and loving. And I just was like, oh, wow, cool. Like, I
Mm.
see myself in them and like this concern for bigger things than, I don't know, myself and like connecting to a community and to this mysterious God
Mm.
that I hadn't really reflected on.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I was involved in Young Life and then church planting around the Kansas City area
Wow.
through college.
What church planning group?
So out of Heartland, which
Oh
was
yeah.
in Overland Park
I
back
know
in the day.
I know Craig McIlvaine.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
pastor.
Yeah.
And I helped with the church plant that is now Redemption.
What was the name of the first plant out of there was a guy I'm blanking. I was friends with him too. I'm blanking on his name now. It was the first I think it was one of the first church plants out of Heartland.
Yeah, I can't
Dan
remember.
Diebel. Dan Diebel.
Yeah,
I
what
know Dan.
was well,
I
I
forgot the
was
name of
working
that
with
one.
I can't remember what Dan's plant was,
Yeah.
but I worked with Kevin Cloud, Tim Settle, Seth Davidson, that crew,
Okay.
and then planted Heartland K10 Lawrence, which is now
Okay.
Vintage Church, which I still have dear friends who are involved, like the Flynns, with
Okay.
ministry at Vintage and Lawrence.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, it is. It is. No, we have a lot of like overlap there.
Yeah, for sure.
But I was a film person, right? Like the daughter of the artist. My film world was what I wanted to do. Like I wanted to make MTV. I wanted to make music videos.
Mm.
At the time that it was dying as an art form. So I studied film at KU, and I did a lot of film shorts and creative projects for these church plants and for worship. And that's actually where I really started to get interested in thinking about why we make the choices that we make aesthetically with worship and preaching. And that's really what started this idea, not only of like, oh, go to seminary, you can talk and think more about why we make the choices that we make in liturgy and preaching, but then also, oh, even better, become a professor and then get to do this research and also empower and equip religious leaders to be critical and creative with the
Hmm.
choices that they make in
Yeah,
preaching and worship.
very cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what degree did you get at KU?
I got a bachelor's of arts in theater and film.
Wow. And then what was your next step out of college?
Out of college, I spent a year working at Vintage and it's like one of those amazing synchronicity moments because she worked with one of my best friends in the like service organization out of KU. And my friend was like, "Oh, she has a Master of Divinity or she studied theology. You should get coffee with her and ask her about that." So I didn't know what seminaries were, right?
Mhm.
In the Heartland world, it was like you could do Craig McIlvaine's
Right.
intern
Sure.
program, but that's not necessarily, well,
Accredited.
accredited.
Right.
Um, anyway, so I so I met with her and she was like, Yeah, you should go to seminary and you should go to Chicago because there are like a bajillion seminaries and you can find like the place where you feel like you can ask questions, be welcome
Mm,
because I was unaffiliated, right? Like I'm non-denominational. I don't even know what denominations are because I wasn't brought up in that
yeah.
world at all. And she recommended McCormick Theological Seminary because she said it's very diverse ecumenically. And so
Mm,
misfits won't stand out as much because there are lots of misfits. And she was so right. Like I visited, I felt right at home. I couldn't believe that I could get a degree in asking questions about God, the church, this Holy Spirit, Jesus.
was McCormick
And
originally Methodist or
no, it's
is,
PCUSA.
oh,
It's
okay. Okay.
Presbyterian,
Yeah. Interesting.
but there were disciples there, and that's how I met the disciples. They were
Okay.
like, "Hey, you misfit who doesn't really, believe in like high church and polity and all those regulations. Have you heard of the disciples of Christ? Because we're pretty like, congregationalists, but also we're everywhere." And yeah, so I got involved with the disciples and eventually ordained in the tradition
Hmm,
and have done some pastoring, but really my calling has been uh, education. So
hmm.
I got my PhD at Vanderbilt in homiletics and liturgics, and then was miraculously able to get a job at a seminary back home in Kansas City, which is a very rare feat to for those of us in higher education.
Did you go right from Vanderbilt to St. Paul's?
I did.
Okay.
I hadn't even finished my dissertation when I started adjuncting and doing this thing called an externship with the Theology and Practice program out of Vanderbilt that is like a mentoring opportunity into faculty life, but
Okay.
from another institution. And then they didn't want to get rid of me. They kept me.
Mm.
So I stayed.
For those who don't know, St. Paul's is, I think, Methodist, right?
Yes.
And was Adam Hamilton the president at the time when you first started there, or who
He
was
was on the
he was
he
on
was
the
on the
board maybe? Yeah,
board. But I didn't know when I started, I didn't know board members or what was
right,
going on at the
right.
board. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, cool.
Mm-mm.
So process theology,
Yeah.
because we both hang out with process theologians, and
Mm-hmm.
you're one of them, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to be. So
We're
anyway,
all trying to be, right?
I'm becoming,
We
right?
are oh, that's right. We're all becoming. We're just little human becomings walking
Yes.
the earth. Yeah.
How how did you get introduced to process
Mm.
theology, and give us a little window into, help, because my audience, is all over the map. I'd have some people who are pretty theologians, and then other people who are very lay people. I have evangelicals that's still listening, and I have, anywhere from Trip Fullers to, you know, an evangelical person going to a non-denominational church in Kansas City somewhere. So,
Yeah. Hey, everyone all over the map.
hello. Yes,
I'm
yes,
all over
yes.
the map too.
It's because I've been all over the map. So,
Yeah.
kind of
Yes.
people are just
Well,
praying for my salvation now, even though
oh
anyway, I just,
no. Lord, we just ask you to. Sorry. So process, process. Seminary, of course, like that's where I was absolutely formally introduced to process that, but it was definitely like one of those experiences you may have had too when you're introduced, where it's like, this is what I have always felt in my bones. It's just I didn't have a language to articulate it. But I took this incredible God, suffering, and evil class with Anna Case Winters. I know.
so
Yeah.
she's going to be, I went last year to Tom Ward's deal in Wyoming called
Yeah.
OrtCon, and Tripp was there and a few other folks, Adam Clark. But this year Anna Case Winters is going to be there, and
Oh,
her book on incarnation. What's it titled? It
yeah,
with
I'm blank. I'm not good with names and titles
on
on this
like
spot.
that's honestly my favorite book on incarnation now from
Oh,
a
she's
process. And I haven't met her yet, but I'm really want to meet her. Oh my
you're
goodness.
gonna love it. She is so wonderful, so kind and brilliant. And the way that she walked us through really all of the different trajectories and ways that we can ask these questions of theodicy and why do bad things happen to good people. And she really encouraged us to embody and argue from different voices and different standpoints. When we got to process theology, it like all finally clicked, and it's like one of those cinematic moments where you look back in life and you think, I was seeing scenes from my non-denominational evangelical world where I kind of acquiesced to this sort of platitudinal, God had a bigger plan, or God wants this, and moments where in my bones I felt like resistance to that statement because it seemed wrong, evil. How could God be love and God be God if that's what you're saying? And then seeing, oh wait, what if God's love is like our love, and that it's not coercive, manipulative, and unidirectional, because that is not true compassionate love. Oh, there's actually a theological family and system that explains this, and we can see God in a totally different way as someone whose heart breaks for us, who is present with us, but cannot magically undo the doings that we've done to our environments, to our systems, etc. And that it's actually a relationship we have with this divine force of love, that we have some responsibility to amplify it, make it known, and increase its presence and beauty in our circles of influence.
Hmm.
And God can't do it without us. And that was like, whoa. That was the
Hmm.
moment. And her book, Anna Case Winter's book, God's Power, was a big piece of that
Okay.
aha
I haven't
for
read
me.
that one yet.
I think that's from her dissertation. So
Okay.
it's from a few decades ago, but it's really great
Hmm.
explanation of a process understanding of God's power compared
Mm.
to a more reformed tradition's understanding of God's
Right.
power.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I I got saved in a Southern Baptist youth camp at the age of 16 and stopped smoking weed and felt called to be a
Yep.
pastor. And so I went off to Baylor and Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, but it was in the 80s before the conservative takeover. All my Baylor professors were
Mm,
classic liberals. Like they, Tillich, Bultmann, those were the people I was studying at 18, 19. And I'd been pretty radically saved. So I kind of think, well, I think Jesus really turned me around, so I kind of, as I studied, I started gravitating more toward like your thinking conservative, like today would be a N.T. Wright, kind of person.
yeah.
It's kind of the way I gravitate. But I was reading everybody, right? And
Hmm.
I had to read Hartshorne and
Oh.
Whitehead when I was 18, 19
Oh
years old,
my
just
Lord.
saved out of youth camp. I was really good at math and sciences, and so I remember reading and I'm thinking, huh, it's like God's evolving with everything else. That was my like
Yes.
18-year-old take on
Yes.
process theology. And I didn't then I didn't dive into it. I ended up kind of, like I say, gravitating toward that direction. But in my most recent meltdown of life and deconstruction 6, 7 years ago, it was almost the only way I held on to God was through that lens of process, open relational process theology.
Hmm.
And for those of who, it sounds like mumbo jumbo or something, but one of the things that you said was that the vision of God, I like simplifying it in just uncontrolling love
Yeah.
is the nature of God's being.
Hmm.
It's not top down, hierarchical, unilateral. God doesn't just do anything like, you know,
Bibbidi bobbidi boo. I
hmm
fixed it.
like the genie in the bottle. But
Yeah.
but at every point, co-creating with all creation,
Mm-hmm.
and always in partnership with creation, which classic deism, which I think is heavily influenced by Greek philosophy
Oh,
and
yeah.
perfect ideals and all that. We had
Mm-hmm.
these classical deist ideas that I think creep that it wasn't the Hebrew concept, but it very much became the major concept of God in Christian history.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the Hellenization of the concept of God,
Mm-hmm.
basically, not the
Exactly.
not the Hebrew concept of God. So, any rate, so you bought into that uncontrolling love of God. What resonated with you the most, and what attracted you the most to that idea of God that's different than, say, some of our classical theistic ideas of God? Not what was it that drew you the most to that? How
Yeah,
did
I
it speak
think
to you?
in that moment, what was resonating, um, there were like a few ministry situations and situations just that I think bubbled up with people in your early 20s, mid 20s, where I'd lost some friends to suicide, completing suicide, and also was just really frustrated by the feeling of rupture, this gap between the things that I talk to my friends about over coffee, or the themes that are addressed in the popular music we're interested in. Again, like I'm a music person through and through, so emo and indie music and artists like Sufjan Stevens and
Mm,
folks at that time, the artists that were to me articulating a more complex spirituality than
mm-hmm,
the praise and worship culture of the churches that I was serving.
mm,
And I, so what drew me in was like that language that I wasn't singing in the praise and worship songs. And also at the same time in seminary, being introduced to lament for the first time
mm,
and going, oh, that's the other piece of this puzzle of worship and liturgy and formation that's been missing in my spiritual formation. And it's so important.
mm,
And yeah, I think that's what drew me. It was like, oh, I don't have to walk on eggshells around God.
mm,
God's not a fragile ego who picks and chooses who can come to God's inner circle and report on what God is doing and never say anything negative to God. Oh, that's not God. That's not the Christian God. That's not the Hebrew God. That's a false image of God that is more in our likeness culturally
mm-hmm,
than the
mm-hmm,
reality of Scripture. And that was so freeing to
mm,
me and more true than things that I was being taught through practice or through hmm, just not articulating or walking around the realities of sin and suffering and evil in our world.
mm. Yeah. So I'm thinking of like, so you try to teach pastors as you train them how they could, if they're working out of an open relational process, theological grid or perspective of the world or experience with the world, you're trying to teach them how should this influence the way we do church.
Mhm.
And you can think of ecclesiology
Hmm.
through a process lens. You can think of preaching through a process lens. You can think of developing worship services through a process lens. You can think of how you develop community through. I mean, it's for me, because like I grew, I did my D-Min with Peter Wagner in church growth, and I
Oh,
and I
yeah.
planted a church and grew a mega church, and so like, and I'm not trying to redo all of that. I'm trying to rethink all of everything from a different perspective. So like I almost feel like beginner brain, beginner
Yeah.
thing. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
I've been in ministry over 40 years, but I feel like I'm just starting in some ways of applying. Yeah. And so I still feel like a newbie when it comes to like, oh, how do I do church in connection with this uncontrolling love of God, and why is that important, and how does that work? So yeah, what's a good play? I would like for you to make comment on all of that, like from a preaching perspective,
Yeah.
from an ecclesiology perspective, from a designing worship service perspective. Like just pretend like I'm your student, and give me a 25 minute
Oh my gosh.
rundown on. No, because this is where my brain is. I just did Tom's open and relational Ortline thing, which we was just author after author after author, but it was everybody in this process world, and several of the books weren't so philosophical theological. Some of them were very practical theology, and how do we integrate this into community life, so I'm still wrapping my brain around all this, and
Hmm.
trying to think it through myself, because
Hmm.
I had more of a top down authoritarian white dude thing.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah,
uh,
and a God
I
and a
mean, the
God
church
made
growth
in that image.
movement
Yeah.
was I was a part of that, and
Hmm.
anyway.
Yeah, it's important to start with the conversations of ecclesiology and even clerical authority, because that's like the first sort of sticky place where, depending on the congregation and the community and who's been leading there, that's going to feel the most different, right? If you are someone who's trying to pastor and lead with the integrity of an open relational, process orientation of praxis. Because as you said, right, we've really adopted this very top-down clerical sort of notion of sacramental authority, and really the authority of who gets to interpret the word, that when I do things like try to introduce conversational preaching into a community, it's very hard to just start that right away when the spiritual formation of a community has been to sit still, listen, and trust
Hmm.
what the leader says.
Hmm.
And yet, I'm just thinking of the moment we're in, right? Where the malformation, when the masses are trained to not be critical thinkers, to not go to scripture on their own, and also to believe that for some reason, that person who's paid and ordained has more access to God than anybody else, right? From a process standpoint,
Hmm.
that's not true. That is not true.
Hmm.
It's just all of us have great capacity to be aware of the relationship we have with God and with God through others. It's just how well have we been trained to trust that versus be suspicious of it.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of suspicion and avoidance of that, I think, and a lot of laity, which is pretty heartbreaking. So,
Yeah.
so it has to start with
So
ecclesiology. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, one thing that priesthood of the believe,
Hmm.
or priestesshood or priesthood, whatever, of the believer is,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's a Lutheran Protestant kind of idea, but we didn't live it out that well, right?
No,
I
there
mean,
was,
if you think about the Reformation and all the way down to now, we still created our own hierarchies within the movement that was supposed to be embracing the priesthood of all believers.
right, right. And it's really interesting. One of the things I look at when I'm teaching worship, or history of preaching, is to pay attention to the way that the Protestant Reformation sort of created the word and interpretation of the word into its own sort of sacrament. And again, that means that a certain authority is the one who is able to rightly administer the sacrament to the people. So we have, like mega churches like that we've been part of where someone can preach for 45 minutes and there's really no other sacramental activity taking place. The center is the word, and the word is, and the center of that is the pastor, the preacher. And but then in a process standpoint, like many voices should be gathering around the word. And in fact, we would perhaps know more about who God and is and isn't if we were actually turning to one another and listening well to one another as we gathered around the word, which can't happen very well in mega context. And if that's actually a benefit of the small dying church, is that I think there's more flexibility and
Mm,
agility and possibility
mm.
to adapt a process, homiletic and liturgy into the body.
Yeah. So give me some examples of that. What does that look like?
Um, so my mentor, John McClure, would never call his approach, one that's necessarily a process theology approach, but he was very influenced by Habermas, Levinas, and the ethic of obligation when we're face to face with a neighbor. So his roundtable preaching text from like 1994 was, I think, such an early example of what I'm talking about, though again, he wouldn't
I
call
haven't
it.
read that one. I'm going to write that down.
Well, it's
Say it one more.
about,
Say
so
one more
it's
time. The round
yes,
table.
the round table pulpit leadership. Oh, I can't remember the exact time. Sorry, John. I'm looking at my books right now to see if I have it on this shelf or at another shelf, but I don't see it. The round table pulpit. But he describes this method of preaching life where there is always feed forward and feedback on the sermon and small tables of lay people, of congregational leaders around the scripture every week. And then he even expands it to say, and why not community members, right? For a
Mm,
season, who it's like, hey, you don't have to join our church, but we want to hear your voice when the scripture's read. Like, what are you thinking? What are your experiences? And that's what informs the
mm,
sermon.
mm,
But what I love about it is it's not just about like, and this is the content for the sermon on Sunday, but if you are a community in this praxis, you are a dialogical community and you're forming these relationships of trust and seeing one another that I think is a very open relational example of praxis, right?
mm,
And so transformative because then people are coming into voice, taking more ownership for their faith and belief, and seeing their neighbor and working through conflict and disagreement in ways that we are really shitty at in
mm-hmm.
2025, and
Yeah.
especially in the church, where the only time we ever come face to face with each other seems to be when we're making decisions and votes and scarcity thinking and board meetings,
Mm,
right? And not spiritual formation and not these
mm,
sort of
mm-hmm.
spiritual realities. So so that's one example I would
Yeah.
say of what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Hierarchy.
Hmm.
Talk about that a little bit. Ecclesiology and hierarchy and what.
Yeah, I mean, Uh, we wouldn't say, right, that I wouldn't say, I won't speak for you, but I wouldn't say that process theology is a like anarchic, like there is no leader. So everybody's a leader,
Right.
right? That's like chaos.
Yeah.
So there is, I think it would be a misunderstanding to think that process, open relational theologies are a hierarchical in nature.
Right.
It's just a
Right.
different way of power and power sharing. We still
Mm-hmm.
need leaders,
Mm-hmm.
or as John McClure would say, like hosts, and that's a language I utilize in my book, Engaging the Gadfly, to talk about dialogical preaching. Is that what if
So, by the
pastor?
way, I'm just
Yeah,
curious. I tried to find engaging the
it's
gadfly,
not published yet.
and
It's
I hunted it everywhere. I'm like
it's
going,
not
where
out
can I
yet.
get this book? Anyway, so
The proofs are coming to me allegedly soon.
Okay.
And so that means
Did you do your,
summer.
is this your dissertation?
Yeah.
And then you're just kind of reworking it into a more,
Oh my gosh, it's so reworked.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
because 2016 is very different from 2025.
Okay.
And it talks about social media and technoculture and how it's shaping the church and culture in different ways. So it's very, yeah, it's been updated.
Yeah.
AI is in there.
Engaging the gadfly, and gadfly is like a voice of sort of critique or
Hey,
opposition or something.
yeah, like, hey, things are changing. Buzz, buzz. Yeah.
Hmm.
So engaging the gadfly is inspired by Whitehead talking about what happens when the gadfly starts buzzing around and what it signals to an institutional culture. There's a great shift about to take place.
And
So,
people, I mean, it's happened. I mean, for
yeah.
50 something straight years or more, the church has been in decline all around America.
Hmm.
It's already declined in Europe, right? But
Oh, yeah.
America's catching up.
Hmm.
Million or more people a year leaving churches. We've got disciples, denominations that are got all these old buildings with assets that are, big auditoriums with 20 people in them.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, so for these long-term mainline institutional churches that are dying, like there's no, I mean, if you go to Africa or South America, and Pentecostalism is still buzzing and growing in different places, and I don't even, maybe even AGs are still growing in America, but Southern Baptists aren't. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's an interesting mix right now. What's happening in the Western world in particular with church life, and oh man, the thing is, like, even if there's not a God, like because I wrestled with that in my darkest moments. Like,
Mhm.
I wasn't even sure if there was a God anymore. You know what I mean? Like, and that was more of a experience, a feeling of darkness that felt like God wasn't there for me. And that's what, so when I was thinking of that, but even from an evolutionary standpoint, most species flourish better together, whether you're talking about
Yeah.
trees or meerkats or Homo sapiens. You know what I mean? Like, survival of the fittest, yeah, but survival of the friendliest also, you know?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
we need community to thrive as human
Hmm.
beings. We can't thrive in opposition. Yet how can we as church and followers of Jesus bridge the gap of our culture, like bailing on communal institutions that have been around for decades or hundreds or centuries, into what's emerging now, and how is that going to help people find community that helps them thrive? These
Hmm.
are the things you're wrestling with, right?
Yeah.
In your
Oh, yeah.
book, right?
Exactly.
So engaging the gadfly, folks. I can't wait to read it
This
once I can
summer.
get my hands on it. But maybe you can give us some thoughts along those lines, as I was espousing some of that stuff that's going on culturally, contextually in the
Mhm.
world today.
Yeah, I mean, what I talk about in the book is how, as you said, we're already in the next great 500-year shift.
Second axial age, or what do they call that?
Yeah, I
Or
care.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, but it has happened. It's happening, and we get to lead in the midst of it. Lucky us. Um, but it's an opportunity to really be attentive to the choices that we are making in our designs and our structures, our way of promoting community and ways of being together that are shaped by an understanding of Jesus Christ. Or all institutions are doing this. It's not just Christian
Right.
churches, it's all institutions. We're seeing it in this country just absolutely implode a reaction to these changes, right? Um, and what I talk about is approaching this digital social media technoculture with more curiosity than just simply critique, or I embrace it all. And what our church needs to do is get a social media account and do this and that. And that's how we survive, right? That neither one of those poles is like the right answer. We need to be in the middle, discerning, discussing and trying, experimenting. And I think that one of the biggest issues is folks are challenging this top-down mass media, print, broadcast technoculture that is the way our worship is designed for most institutions is very non-participatory. I'm talking especially to white mainline congregations. Sit in your butt, be still, and don't really engage. Um, and I don't know, it's not really attracting people anymore. And there were cultures where that was enough and it felt participatory just to be a member of an institution. And what I notice, I'm one of the few Christians in my friend group, right? Most of my friends my age would not call themselves Christians, but religious or spiritual. And they're deeply involved in book groups or in smaller groups like I'm a part of Mom's Rage and these groups that gather together around affinity and justice and purpose to make the world better, where yes, there's a leader, but that leader isn't making all of the choices, all of the decisions, and the way that we gather doesn't look rigidly the same every week, but we're responding to situations and meeting each other's needs in a more
Hmm.
fluid, organic way. And I think that mm, as we get smaller as churches, there's an opportunity to notice that that is working and that people are seeking community still and seeking to do things with their precious life that make a difference. But they just don't think that sitting in your church for 1 hour for worship it is that. It feels more consumeristic than these other forms of small group participation and connection and relationality. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I talk about that.
Yes, well, because I'm my own self, I'm reprocessing all of this stuff. I'll be 64 next Monday. So,
Woo!
yeah, right. So I'm like, it's almost like everything that I had learned, I'm trying to unlearn and then trying to relearn again, right? That
Hmm.
process of learning, unlearning, relearning, and really trying to think things through from this lens for me, So like I was trained to preach in the Southern Baptist world, and but then I love the charismatic worship world, and I believe in the Spirit moving, and so I'm trying to figure out what to hang on to and how to reshape it so that I can move it forward in the kinds of contexts that you're thinking of right now. So that's why I've been trying to get you on my podcast because you're you've been thinking about these things for a long time, and I'm trying to learn from people like you. Um, the Gadfly, I'm thinking of like, is that a little bit like from Voices from the Margins kind of a thing? Because when you were talking about, like I'm a part of, there's a gal named Frances Story here in Kansas City that runs a writers workshop group, and they meet together. Like right now, we meet on Zooms on Tuesday nights. It's mostly people who have left the church, very secular group of people, but they call it church basically. And she sets it up with like you do a writer prompt, prompt one, prompt two, prompt three. You give 10 minutes to write, 10 minutes to write. It's a 2 hour deal. But then after we write, then you pass around and there might be 20 or 30 of us and everybody shares what they wrote on, two or three people share what they wrote prompt one, two or three people share what they wrote prompt two. And it's a beautiful community experience around writing and creativity. And they call it church. It's their church, right? And I think of like Calvin at Greenwood Social Hall, and he's providing
Yeah.
a artistic musical venue for those who have been historically marginalized. So for women, people of color, and indigenous people, and LGBTQ plus, and it's community. He's
Mhm.
building community, allowing artists to. It's really beautiful. So I see these kinds of things out there outside the church that are
Yeah.
being church to people. They're really supplying spiritual knitting together of community, and I'm like, I love these things, and I'm thinking, how can we do better at the church world? Yeah, these are all the thoughts, that are running through my head. I'm in a part of the cycling community. We go out and ride
Hmm.
bikes together, but there's actually real authentic community. When I fell apart, my cycling buddy, men and women were there for me more than my church folks was. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah. And
There
it,
were
and
other
it,
communities that were more community for me when I fell apart, like the 12 step world, cycling world, and
yeah.
a few other worlds than the church was.
So it makes you wonder, right? Like the way that church has been designed, the ecclesiology, the liturgy, all of that, um, to function. What's the fruit of that? What's the spiritual formation? I argue that we haven't done a great job of really cultivating community in a lot of these spaces because it has become more about the product that's delivered on Sunday and received on Sunday, than the forming of a beloved community in which we are those who have much share with those who have little, and we are making sure that the body is well. We're discerning the body, as Paul would say in First Corinthians chapter 11, right? We really haven't. We've lost a lot of that the bigger we got in scale and production of preaching and worship, I think. I think.
Hmm.
And it's also
Yeah.
become unsustainable for those who are all in on the institution, want to stay with this production, and keep the building and keep everything at the same scale, but they're noticing that younger people aren't coming and giving money to support it. Now there's that trauma, right? It's like we feel like we still have to do worship this way, or it's not worship and it's not church, instead of paying attention to this gadfly buzzing and being like, well, what's the invitation? Like, as the people we are now with the resources we have now, how should we center ourselves on the teachings of Christ, break bread together, initiate people, and take care of our community?
Yeah, I've tried to boil down my life right now into four communities that I'm invested in. One is the recovery community, one is the mindful meditation community. I just finished a couple of year training with Jack Cornfield and Tara Brock and mindfulness
Cool.
meditation,
Awesome.
and I do stuff with there. And then the deconstruction community, those who've exited church hard and really don't want to go back to church, but then I'm still doing church too, right?
Yeah, you
So,
are.
so some people I only encounter in one of those community groups, but then some of the people are in all of them with me. You know what I mean? And I'm in all of it. I'm trying to rethink through this lens, this open relational process lens of uncontrolling love of God, cooperating at all points and times, co-creating at all points and times with us, with humans as well as all creation. Not it's not even just I'm pretty human centric, but I want to think about the whole planet and the health of the whole planet as well, and partnering
Hmm.
with all of creation. Yeah, so it's been such an interesting journey to like learn, relearn, kind of learn, unlearn, relearn. That's been my story here lately. What do you feel like are key points for people who are out there who are doing church, trying to create church in new ways? What are what are some of the key ideas that you're trying to put across in your classes as you train a new generation of people to do church in this new context and creativity? What are some of your big points that you're trying to put across in your classes?
So I think the first thing I would say is to really get to know your community, your people, their story, and see all of that as assets, right? We all have different starting places for this work, and it's really, I think, dangerous when we do the comparison game because we don't look exactly like that congregation over there with their success. And so trying to copy it and mimic it is probably going to burn us out as a community because we are a different situation, context, and environment, and that's okay. Um, and one of the other pieces that I've been really focusing on and speaking more to is like the beauty of moving slowly through these shifts and with intention. So I've been really influenced of like my life as a homeowner for the last 6 years now and gardening and the wisdom of creation and God speaking to me through it of like, yeah, when you sow seeds that first year, there's not much is going to grow.
Mm.
However, by year two, year three, things like, native plants, they shoot up and it's just like this abundance, this glory that is worth the wait. It's just that it takes time and we're so trained to want things to be fixed instantly in our culture, including our church cultures, when spiritual formation and transformation, it takes time. So if you want to shift to more dialogical ways of worship and preaching and leading the church, like small changes over time instead of being a shock jock who enters in. And because then that's like power over and saying, this is not working anymore, and I'm going to do church this way. And what you're going to do is lose people, burn people out, and miss out on what beautiful thing could have blossomed in your environment that isn't happening elsewhere. So I think those are the main things that I would offer.
When you when when students land in your classes, um, are they all ages? Are you still have mostly a younger crowd, or is it more all
All
like
ages, all life
okay,
experiences. Yeah, from mid 20s to 70s, right? All
okay.
all ages.
And like what do you see in your class? Like what are some of the big fun things for you when you see the light bulb go on somebody and they're catching on to a vision of something that they're excited about um, taking out beyond the classroom? What are some of those highlights for you in terms of as you teach and train? What are light bulb moments for you in your students' lives that you
Mhm.
really that that make you percolate and come alive?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I get to witness and accompany so many amazing student pastors who are doing incredible work. And I love like following and seeing the seed of transformation, like from a paper or from a lecture on dinner church or, different little snippets where um, everyone's so different, and the thing that clicks with one person is going to be different for another. But when they really take it to heart and adapt it to their context, that is my greatest joy. So I've seen students who we had this assignment to design your ideal worship space, right? We talked about the theology of sacred architecture, and
Mhm.
to see students then come to really be take it to learn in a different way how to articulate what they really believe worship is for through the design of space, right? And so one who did it in a field outside intentionally because they wanted to bring in people who were unhoused and living in a different park area. And then it's like, and then they do it. Or somebody who does, actually get grants and work on transforming a church that they inherit as a pastor that was doing traditional worship. And they have absolutely stripped it and turned it into a dinner church. And the community is all in on it through years of slowly walking alongside them, listening and creating something together that God is like very much involved in.
Mhm.
So when I see those material shifts in the community, I'm just so thrilled. It's not just about the grades that they get, the papers that they write, the sermons they preach in my class, but that's where I light up is when I see the transformation in the ways that they lead in the world.
Mm, love that. We're running out of time here, but talk a little bit about what you're doing with Pause Play, your podcast, Pause
Yeah.
Play, I just listened to several episodes of that here in the last couple of weeks, and love what you're doing there. Give us a little window into that world.
Yeah, so the Pause Play Center for Preachers is funded by the Lilly Foundation's Compelling Preaching Grant project. And we are a center that exists to work on healing the soul of preachers because we believe compelling preaching comes from pastors who are well and healthy humans who have a good balance of play and rest. And we can't teach tips and tricks to people who are unwell. That's not going to fix preaching. So we have a podcast and we have monthly episodes that revolve around these sorts of themes. But we also have an annual gathering in Kansas City where you might play drums or make collages or do puppetry. And it's for all pastors who want to spark joy in their preaching life again. So you can see information about the
Yeah,
July gathering on our website. We also have a
that you're
cohort
you're going to
that
do
we
another one of those this summer here
yeah,
in Kansas.
July Crossroads Hotel in the
Okay.
Arts District, July 30th through August 2nd. You can stay for all 3 days or just get a 1 day pass and come play with us. And then we also do an annual cohort of 12 pastors from across the country who get to spend a year being mentored, being offered spiritual direction, workshops. We do readings together to create accountability around balance and rest and creativity in our pastoring life.
Hmm.
And so that's the Pause Play Center for Preachers.
It sounded so fun. As I was listening to some of the podcasts, I was going, "Dang, I want to build a fort." Maybe
Yes,
you had one where you talk about building a fort with people.
it
You
is
know.
fun. It was fun when we were kids. It's still fun now.
Right. No, that's good. That's good stuff. Yeah, and is I know is Amy Shoemaker part? Does she help you with
Yes.
that?
Yeah, she's
Amy.
my arts consultant and event coordinator, Amy
Okay.
Shoemaker. Yeah.
Yeah, she's fun. And then who else is collaborating with you on that?
So Joshua Gilbert is our storyteller producer who also works with Trip Fuller's podcast. And so he's our digital
Okay.
storyteller.
Okay.
And then we bring in a whole bunch of different amazing people I know, like, Amy Oden, for example, is one of our spiritual directors, author of Right Here, Right Now, and church historian, and just altogether amazing human being. So we get to partner with different consultants and
Okay.
coaches in the work.
Very cool. Well, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on Spirituality Adventures. And yeah, when we get this post, we'll send it to you and yeah, post it to your social media stuff
I
too.
will. Thank you so
Yeah, it's
much.
great. I'm trying to get the word out on this whole open relational process world of doing church and community and trying to learn and grow in it myself. So thanks for your contribution to this world. I can't wait to get a copy of Engaging the Gadfly as well.
Yeah,
So,
me too. I'm ready for it.
all right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Fred.
All right.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.